Greetings, everyone. Today we have the pleasure of hosting an extraordinarily educator and strategic thinker, Jeff Savage. As the director of the Faber Entrepreneurship Center, Jeff has a passion for connecting people, ideas, and groups. A firm believer in the power of application-based learning, his innovative teaching approach helps students bridge the gap between academic theory and real-world business scenarios. Whether through his consulting work or research efforts, Jeff's ultimate aim is to help individuals and organizations realize their potential.
Jeff, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today.
Yeah, you're welcome, Igor. It's great to be here.
So could you talk a little bit about your role and what do you get paid to do?
Yes, I'm the director for the Faber Entrepreneurship Center at the University of South Carolina's Darla Moore School of Business. And so I get paid in that slice of my life to run this center that really exists only in my office. It's not like there's some large center. It's a grand sounding name, but really it's more imaginary or fictitious. Though there is a bank account associated, so there is some financial incentives. But as part of that, we work with a lot of students and external companies, mostly people who have a business idea that they're looking to put into practice, or either it's like that early stage and they're hoping to ramp up somewhere in those early stages. For students, we do a lot of what I call kick the tire thinking, where they're like, hey, I want to open a gym. It's like, oh, great. All right, well, what will this gym look like? And we'll just ideate and talk through that. As part of that, we have some competitions that we run. We do speaker events. There's a number of activities. We do workshops, etc., all designed to help students see entrepreneurship or business ownership as a path that they can walk. Because I think the traditional path of corporate America, especially for business school students, like that's the sun. Like they see that everywhere. And so in order to help them choose another path, you have to show them what that path looks like. And that's a lot of what the center does. We also help connect them to the local ecosystem to help them meet startup founders and influencers and individuals, investors who are kind of helping either start their own firms or kind of latched on to helping the group grow. I also teach at the university. I teach entrepreneurship as well as management, leadership, strategy, and innovation, commercialization. So there's a number of kind of teaching hats I wear. But that's mostly what I get paid to do, at least officially.
Yeah, you said at least officially, and it piqued my curiosity because you read about those fancy startups that recruit the university professors to join the team or to join an advisory board. Have you come across situations like that?
Yes, I have. And I do serve on a few advisory boards. And this summer, we are running a veterans entrepreneurship program that we call Strive. And that's been a way to kind of help bring in some funding to the center, as well as give back to the community, because it's a free program for vets, for military veterans, I should specify. But for me, in the summer, I have more time and flexibility. And so I'm working really closely with a couple students who have kind of co-developed with me this startup idea. And it's a consulting kind of data analytics project. And that's been a lot of fun. We're working with local companies, and so that's been a blast. And there's a couple graduates who I've worked with in the past as well. And so I'm an advisor for a few different companies. And then this summer, I'm also working on a startup, which is not student related at all. It's someone else, a professional who called and asked if I would be a part of that. And so I find that over the summers, I get to get not necessarily paid a lot because startups don't have much money to pay people. but there's some funding and maybe some equity. So I own pieces of something that may eventually be worth something. Right now, they're not worth anything, but we'll see.
But I would also like about this, it's like bringing real life experience into the academic setting, which is awesome.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the key reasons that I ended up not being or pursuing the tenure track. The more typical professor option. I have a PhD. I've done some of those things. I actually just sent off one of the essays from my dissertation that I think I finished writing in 2014, the first draft. So it's been a long time, but that's how these things work. I just didn't find that I had the passion for that. But to get to this experiential teaching piece, I think it's really important for business faculty, especially, to have one foot, even if it's a toe, in industry, because there's a lot of things there that are there are universal elements to everywhere, right? To everything, but humans are a hard thing to study, and so a human created business, it's really hard to study. It's impossible to look at it like a lab. And so applying the tools that we have in physics or biology or chemistry works sometimes, but it's because you can't isolate a business or isolate founders in the same way. You can't cause them to do an experiment and clone themselves and say, all right, Howard, you made a coffee business. Now go back in time and make a tea business. Will you do the same? Like, where will you, will that be successful too? Was it coffee? Was it you? Was it timing? Right? It's just really hard to kind of get at some of these elements. And so I find that bringing in real life insights and examples and then getting students involved with that is, at least for me, it's more fulfilling. I'm not bored lecturing on something that I've lectured about 100 times because I have new examples all the time. And it also, I think it's a humbling experience to work with real companies and situations because I don't know the answer either. Right? If I'm teaching you a case, a Harvard case, or if I'm running a simulation, I've seen that 20 times, 50 times, who knows, 100 times before. So I already know the right answer. And it's easy to kind of have some hubris with that and assume that I always know the answer because I always know the answers in this little set of problems. But in working with real companies, I don't, right? And so sometimes my advice is great, and other times it's, good advice for one situation, but not the right context. Just this morning, I was looking into aluminum tubing for one of these startup companies, and I'm not an engineer, or I'm not a metallurgic specialist by any stretch. And so I was trying to ask this manufacturer some questions, and she's like, I don't know, I'm not an engineer. I'm like, yeah, I know, neither am I. But, kind of having that attitude of, but let's figure this out anyway is a lot of fun.
Very cool. I appreciate the big background that you gave, and also this idea of a professional track for faculty members, something I was not really familiar with, but it seems to fit really well with entrepreneurial work that you're doing. What would you say, and you talked a little bit about things that you enjoy, like working on real companies. What is the most challenging part of your job right now?
Man, there are a number of challenging elements with working in a university setting. One of which is it's a fairly bureaucratic place, state-run institution. It's hard to get things done in a novel way using the exact same old methods. So grades are an interesting part. That's probably the headache that, I feel more often than anything else. I think the harder thing is getting students to really dive into a project and act like owners. So I think that's a big challenge. Is I've found that if the student has the seed and the desire for that, it's not too hard to kind of fan that flame. And I know I'm mixing metaphors. I'm sorry for that. But if there are, but there are a number of students, and I swear COVID has made it harder, who are more passively just like sitting back, like, all right, feed me. And I think that's a hard nut to crack, because if they're already like that, that attitude is really difficult to change from someone external. And so I think that's probably the hardest part about the role. Though again, that's hard because there are also lots of students who are interested and engaged, and then there's only one me. And even though there are, more people in the center, there are two other faculty who are like me, kind of professional track, who are working and helping, and they're awesome. We're still just a couple of people, and we've got other aspects to the job, and so it can be difficult to be strained or pulled in so many directions.
Reflecting back on non-engaged students, do you feel it's worthwhile to invest energy, like additional energy, into re-engaging them or finding a novel way? Or is this energy better spent, like you said, with students who are already placing a lot of demands on your time, who are really passionate, or who at least have a flame that can be kindled?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's an unfair question at some level, right? Because you would hope that you could reach any student, and I do believe, and I'm more optimistic maybe this way, but I think everyone can be reached. But I don't know if the university is the right time for everyone. So I've tried really hard to retool and just shift the classes that I teach. I try hard not to have much lecture. I don't use textbooks. We do have some books, but they tend to be, classic bestseller, books that like are written by someone who did really well in their field. And, I guess I'm moving away from the idea of the university as a knowledge giver, in terms of, here's a set of terms that you need to know. I know them. Now I want you to know them. And then you regurgitate them at the end of the semester. Because you can look them up, right? They're very easy to look up these days. And that part of knowledge is not sealed anymore. It used to be hard to access libraries. You'd have to go look around, and, now you don't need, that's very, very much easier to access knowledge. So the harder thing is exercising that knowledge, right? Using it. And so I try to foist that upon the students very early on. And, the ones who don't want to be engaged have a hard time. We do a lot of group projects, and so that maybe there's a little bit of social pressure that helps them perform better. Obviously, grades matter, but I try to help them see how this is relevant for them. So every topic I teach, I always tie it to, hey, in your life, this matters for this reason. And maybe I shouldn't have to do that, but that's kind of been my approach. Like, okay, with these things, I'm going to try to reach everyone. But that being said, they're getting maybe 20% out of the lecture, whereas some others are getting 80%, just because they're showing up. They're actually showing up. And so that's really on them. So I don't cry myself to sleep every night because of that. But neither do they get the extra mentorship or benefits of really engaging or emailing me after and saying, all right, well, you said this, but here's what, but some do. And that's, it's more engaging. Honestly, if everyone did, it would be exhausting. I'd have to come up with some other way of, like a Slack channel or something. But I've never had that in my course of human life, where you've had too many people engaged. Even in like Sunday school as a kid, I was the one who was like actually reading and coming to class and ready. And so I think I resonate better with certain types of students. And so I know I serve those types better than I do others.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about mentorship. So how does mentorship fit into the work that you do? And do you leverage any external mentors from the university or from the community?
Yes, mentorship is a big deal. The center itself I think that's a big percentage of what we do, is meeting with students either one-on-one or in small groups. But again, it's kind of based on, do they have a project? Do they have an idea? Do they have something that they want to push forward? If they do, and every year there's, a handful that they have a business they really want to start, and they've started it and they want to grow, those we'll talk, once a week, or more, depending on the timing and the stage and where they're trying to go for. And so for them, if you know someone on the mentorship side, if I know a student is really interested in like a gym, right, starting a new gym, a boutique gym, then I've got some contacts. Like I know people here in Columbia that started gyms and they own and they've run them. And so it's fairly easy to say, hey, I want you to talk to Jamie Scott Fitness. He's awesome. He's designed this cool thing. If you copy him, it's going to be hard for him. So don't go where he is. But gym memberships are very localized. And so that's kind of diving too far into that one example. But it's hard for me if someone's like, hey, thinking about starting a business, what do you think? It's like, yeah, that's a good question. It's difficult to be a mentor to someone who's not already going somewhere. But if they are going in a direction, I feel like I've got a lot of tools at my disposal to help them go faster, better, or more safely. There's books. I'm looking to my top right because I have a library of entrepreneurship books that I will that the center has bought, and so we'll lend them out for free. And I think doing stuff like that helps out a lot. But you have to have someone who's willing to read and willing to learn.
That makes sense. So it looks like you're acting like a navigator for people who are come in with a specific challenge, and you direct them to the right resources without much formalization of the whole mentorship engagement at this time, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And unless, well, no, I think that is a really good metaphor, because I'm more of an external navigator. And then at some point, and it's only happened fairly rarely, but the company will get to a place and they like me enough as a navigator that it's like, hey, will you navigate for us long term? And depending on how that relationship goes, I'll say yes or no. It's getting harder to say yes to things because you say yes to something a year ago and it's still, you're still saying yes to it, right? Because you're still involved. So yeah, I like that. So not formal. I don't know if there's a best approach to mentorship. I've been thinking about that for a while. My style is taking those who are interested in kind of creating space in my life so that I can help them out. I mean, honestly, that's, I think, one of the hardest parts about mentorship for me is finding time to be a good mentor. Yeah, sorry, you didn't necessarily ask that question, but that's been thinking about that as well. So I do try to leverage some external mentors as well. There are some people in the community. We have a group called GrowCo locally in Columbia that's really great. There's a very different but very cool group called FemX with other really cool founders who have done some cool things. And so kind of depending on where they want to go, I can help move them around. But students are typically at a pretty nascent stage. And so it can be difficult to find a mentor who's willing to put in that time, because they'll need a lot of time. And so again, it's hard to find good mentors. I was again, I've been thinking about mentorship for a while, and I think with a few small exceptions, all my career mentors have been people who benefited by the work that I did for them. And so, like as a master's or PhD student, they were, I was helping them do research. And so I could talk about ideas and I could run stuff down, It's like, all right, well, let me do these interviews for you. I'll come back to you and tell you what I found. So it's been hard to find mentors who are just like, yeah, I'll be there. And that may be part of academia. Like academia is kind of built. We have this mentorship structure, but it's more of an apprenticeship where you're working for me, as my PhD student or as my underling, my junior researcher. And so it's much less of a purely hey, here's how I can help you mentorship situation, which isn't necessarily bad. That's not necessarily saying that's wrong, but it's not the purely selfless situation. And maybe that's just part of the decision you have to make. It's I have limited time. I can't mentor everyone. And so I'll work, we'll work together and I will be providing mentorship along the way. But it's more of as we're working together, every so often there's that conversation well, hey, how are you doing? Rather than anything. And I've never had, so I guess I've never had a truly formal mentor like that.
I've had some experience with the mentorship model on MIT VMS kind of side. And my insight is that one-on-one mentorship is probably the best, but it's really hard to find the right person, to click with that person, and to get them to commit time to whatever you're working with. But I feel the second best thing you can provide is a team of mentors. And I've talked to some other programs and people who are not involved in such structured programs. And the common insight, which is surprising, that people enjoy more working with other mentors if there are opportunities for team mentorship, for example. This is where they build bonds and stay loyal to the program versus working with a particular founder or a particular idea, because those fizzle out, but people build very long-term relationships. And I find this is something that is pretty cool, but it takes a little bit of effort to scale. But this is my passion with my startup, Traction 5.
Yeah, but that makes a lot of sense because, and again, maybe I'm focusing more on academia because that's my life. Students do need a lot of help, and it is a lot of pressure to be the mentor. And we do have the university. We have this Business Partnership Foundation, the BPF, which is a group of individuals who are industry professionals who are kind of serving on an advisory board for the business school. And many of them are mentors for one or two students a year. So there is a formalized practice, but again, that's not on the entrepreneurial side. Most of them are corporate America. And so again, corporate America it's like the yellow brick road, and you walk down it, it's a very clear road. And so it's easy to say, hey, when I was at Bank of America, I did X, Y, Z to rise up. Now that you're at Bank of America, you should do X, Y, Z to rise up. There are universal principles that apply everywhere, but it is an easier job to mentor. I think it's harder to mentor startups or entrepreneurial-minded students. And so having a group of mentors, A, with someone who can kind of pick up the slack in an area you don't know, and then B, just having that interaction of being able to learn from how other people mentor. Because unless you had a very good mentor, you may not know what that looks like. And so you're kind of exploring that on your own as you go.
That makes a lot of sense. But what I found some programs get from more formal mentorship programs, or engagements is that you have a group of engaged volunteers who can support a one-man operation if they're getting value from the organization. You mentioned a little bit about the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Colombia. Could you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah.
What is it like?
It's pretty small. It's growing. This group called GrowCo was only formalized last year, really, maybe a year and a half or 2 years, depending on when you count it getting started. But that's the goal, is to create this entrepreneurial ecosystem. Part of the problem is there are not. Again, it's like I said with mentorship earlier. I think people are incentivized to go to meetings when they need something. It's rare to find someone who will just show up at as a mentor. Partly because of time, partly because of commitment, partly maybe the pressure. And so the community here is growing, but it's still very small. And so if you were to have even 20 students show up to there and say, hey, we all really are looking for a mentor, they'd be really hard pressed to serve that at this stage, especially since so many of the people there are, young startup founders themselves.
I've actually traveled to one event in Colombia from Charlotte, which is 1 million cups. Mm-hmm. And I was blown away by the attendance at this weekly event. You had like 70 people. And there were startups pitching their ideas. And I've been in touch with Caroline Crowder, I think that's her name. And she seems to be doing some exciting things. So is there like an opportunity for students to plug in into those activities right now, or it's more like on a case-by-case basis?
There are some opportunities. So Caroline she's the director of GrowCo right now. And the group started this group called G Alpha. So it's like that alpha stage, like this early stage. And so they've worked with several students each cohort. And almost exclusively they've come from me, or like the center. Like we have shuttled them over, or they've worked with, we work together at some level. They may not have gone through me to that. But I've worked with all the students who work with them. Maybe I'll say it that way. But I think that's a great program because it is something more formal. And so it's something that we could do now that they're doing it. We don't have to do. And I'm still really kind of figuring out what the best way is for us to get a mentorship program going, though, or a more robust one going.
That makes sense. Happy to chat separately about mentorship, as I've tried different things. And I have a personal agenda here, but I'm excited to see things happening in Colombia. But I wanted to talk specifically a little bit about the university itself, because in addition to your center, there is another center, I think McNair Center, with Catherine and Dirk Brown involved in this. So could you talk a little bit, in a big university, how those entrepreneurial organizations collaborate and define their space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a little bit fluid, I think. So this last year, we started co-running some events. So they have a larger staff, and like people, so Catherine and Dirk both also teach. But they have four people kind of on staff and they're not all teachers. And so they have a little bit more bandwidth to give to certain kind of programs that could be run, very consistently. But we work together a fair amount. We're all looking for students. And so you could see that as like competition, but we're all competing against student apathy. I think that's the biggest thing that we fight against. And so it's better to have all of our students work together. So we do work together a fair amount to kind of help. Again, the university it's a big system. There's tons of students, tens of thousands of students, and so I could never handle, even at 1% of that by myself. And they would, at least from my perspective, they would say the same. And so we, putting events, doing them at the same time, or doing them together, has helped out a lot for us. They have a little bit more formalized system for mentorship. They use a program called Startup Wind, and I've been getting trained on that this summer a little bit, so I can better speak to that. And we're still kind of debating: do we just have that all be one system? Because it would be easier to just have one than have two. But anyway, again, one of those interesting things you wouldn't expect is to have multiple entrepreneurship centers at the same school. But it is what it is.
I think this is awesome. It also speaks to entrepreneurial spirit in a way, that you are giving choice and an opportunity to try different things on a larger and smaller scale. In terms of, you were speaking about apathy, student engagement. And when I talk to other programs, what helps with apathy is financial incentives, grants, or programs or pitch competitions where you can get real money for your idea. Is it something that is popular with students at the University of South Carolina, or do you not get the same traction as with similar organizations in the nation?
Yeah, there is a financial incentive, and so our proving ground, that's what we call our startup competition. It's fairly well attended, and there's we get a fair amount of participation there. That said, I think that a lot of students just haven't even thought about it, and part of that's culturally. If you know someone that left and started a business and now they're successful, if you meet that person as a freshman and they're a senior and they're doing this, and then 3 years later or 2 years later, they've got this budding, growing business and they're talking about it all the time, you're more likely to be like, wow, let me look into doing that on my own. And so I'm trying to boost up that a bit, as well as get students to see that these startup local companies are viable career options or opportunities for them. Because in many cases, I think the best teaching model is apprenticeship, where you are working side by side with someone, solving the problems with them, learning all the ins and outs and the vocab and et cetera as you're working together. And so, again, that's kind of a green incentive too, though. You have to be paid to give your time for that. So money definitely matters, but I think culturally, that's just as, if not more important than the incentives.
And I wanted to ask about your plans. So when we talked previously, you mentioned a small endowment for the center. Do you plan to raise a lot of money and do huge projects? Or do you plan to organically grow the work that you're doing, maybe add a couple of staff members? Or what's your overall vision for this center?
Yeah, well, I first wanted to take care of my bases. And so, get summer funding for myself and for the people who are working here. So we've done that now. And so that was kind of step one. And I'm a year into this. So, some of this is new. The long-term goal would be to see if we can get a larger endowment going. I do lean libertarian, and so I lean away from having lots of staff. I would like to have more just professional track people like us who are passionate about this thing and are kind of always doing it on the side with other, they always have their own business idea or something that's going on. Because I think that's more catching than I don't know, there's something ironic in having entrepreneurship staff, right? Because they're not entrepreneurial, they're staff. And so, yeah, it's a fine line there. I'm not looking to make this a huge thing, but I would like to be bigger and more self-sustaining, which means we, get more alumni engagement. That's kind of a big push right now, is to find people. For instance, for the startup competition we did, we in the past it had been done where business plans were submitted and then they were judged, and the three finalists would come and compete for the prize money. We did a similar structure, but we added another step where we picked the top 10 applicants and invited them out for a one-day mentorship workshop. And so we had 10 different alumni who had experience in that field, and they showed up and they were able to talk through the business idea with the person, with the student or the student team. And, my folks and I were able to kind of float around the different tables and help out as well. And so that led to a lot of, business refinement and ideas improvement. They got connections. Several of those mentorship relationships are still there. Like, they still talk once a month or every other week or something. And so trying to build in, more and more into that. But that was really successful because a lot of alumni want to be involved. They just don't know how. And so, there was something fixed that they could help out with, right? They're not just like presented with, be a mentor or help out somehow. So getting people engaged in the right way, I think, is a big part of what we're trying to do.
And I understand what you're trying to build and your vision. Are there specific things you're hoping to accomplish in the next 6 months, or that excite you the most about the next 6 months?
Yeah, but they're maybe not what you'd expect. I'm really excited about these two startup companies that I'm working with a lot. One of them is a student-based one, and the other one I'm doing more myself. And I think part of why I'm excited is I would love to have some more success, like bigger success stories to talk about. If the student one works, it's a consulting company, but it's a replicable consulting problem. So we've identified a niche that's, I think, exists all across the United States that needs help. And so if we could get it up and get the model figured out, we could bring in more students and have it be this kind of cool thing that grows that way. Yeah, I'm excited about my two little companies, and seeing if, again, neither one of is mine, so that's probably a misnomer, but I feel some ownership over them. And I think that will help even add some legitimacy and maybe add some of that cultural vigor to, like, hey, look, this stuff's possible, and it's possible here in Columbia. It's not, you don't have to fly to San Francisco or to Dallas to make it happen. You can do it here.
This is awesome. And can you name those companies?
Well, one's called Blue Blocks, but it doesn't exist anywhere except for on paper still.
Okay.
We're raising some funding to get that going, and it's an alternate construction material and process. So rather than the wood frame homes that you see, you use what are called ICF blocks, and they're insulated concrete forms. So they look like Lego blocks, basically, and you build the walls out of those, and you fill them with rebar and concrete. The inventor that I'm working with has come up with, and that industry is out there, but it's pretty small. And part of the reason it's small is because there's some issues with the current building. And so with this new material that he's invented, it makes that a much better product. So much so that I think it's the only way I would ever build now that I know about it. And so that one's really exciting. It's manufacturing, which I am excited about because it's harder to get those ones going, but once they're up and running, they can they can scale at a really cool level. And then the other one also doesn't have a name, but we've been doing consulting for post-acute centers. And it turns out they have some really unique problems with getting funded. And so we're hoping to, we've been doing like some process and data analytics work with them.
So and Substitute, is it in healthcare?
Yep. Yeah. So it's healthcare. So it's not AI. It's just, data analytics and kind of process analysis. But we're working with one of the larger companies in the United States right now, and they are really struggling with this. And so it's like, all right, if the fourth largest post-acute corporate company struggles with these things, then I think everyone does. So yeah, it's been fun.
A quick question about you personally, or two questions. What book are you reading right now? And what do you do when you're not teaching or working with startups in your free time?
Well, I have 4 kids, and so that takes up most of that free time category. I do like to exercise, and so I followed the Jocko Willink idea of waking up early so I can make that happen. That's pretty much my that and my side, these side businesses and learning about them or how to do things better. That's a lot of my life. I'm reading a couple books right now. I think one of the more interesting ones is called Insight, and it's about self-awareness. It's by a woman named Tasha Eurich. What I really like about it is there's an appendix, and so it has you kind of read about a topic, and then in the appendix, there's often here's how to get better at this aspect of self-awareness. And self-awareness is one of those, I think, it's part of this emotional intelligence, which we all know about, but we're not very good at it. As a society, I don't think we're very good at relationships even. You were lucky if you had 2 parents that you could mimic for how to have a good relationship. But that's lucky because that's pretty rare, right? Even if they stayed married, doesn't mean that they knew how to engage in constructive conflict or all that stuff. So I'm reading Insight. I'm also reading a book called Traction, which is about, it's a fairly well-known entrepreneurship book, but it's about creating an entrepreneurial operating system, an EOS. And that one's nice because it's very practical. Reading a couple of religious books as well. Some Plato. So I've got a lot of kind of random religious leanings, and so I like to dabble in that sphere. That's probably where, again, my mind goes outside of the family or work sphere.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing. And my final question is about essentially advice for your younger self. So you are essentially in the middle of your career, but you've made this transition to professional track, and you're working in this exciting field of ecosystem building and entrepreneurship. If you could send a tweet or communicate with your younger self, is there any advice you would give earlier on this journey?
Yeah, I would say I don't know how exactly I would phrase it. So, but the idea is roughly this. Do what you want to do. I think I looked outwards a lot as a younger person. Like, okay, what should I do? Give me either a safe path that will make me a lot of money. That's why I studied accounting as an undergrad. Turns out I hated it, and so I could never have done it for very long. So I think I'd tell myself to dive in deep and see what it is that really, where I think I can add value to the world, and does that align with my skill set and what the world needs. There's this idea. There's a fun book called Ikigai, and it's like this Japanese concept of kind of finding that place in your life where it's a strength for you and it's passion for you, and it's something that's needed in the world. And for too long, I I only knew how to compare myself based off public metrics like grades. And it turns out I had pretty good grades. Wasn't a 4.0 student, but I liked and I excelled enough in school to just stay in forever. I did the PhD, which is kind of ridiculous if you're, thinking about it. But I was always kind of looking for an external metric to say, hey, where should you go? And I just didn't look inward enough. There's a lot of words we use that we don't use the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Like smart or intelligence, or it's like, what does that mean? Does it mean you're a good student, or it doesn't mean you're good at memorizing? That used to matter a lot. Now it doesn't matter very much because my calendar and my emails and my things can remind me of what I said or what I'm supposed to do. I don't have to have everything memorized. It's like, okay, well, if it's not that, then what is it? And I found that I'm very well. I think for the average, I'm very good at connecting new things, connecting people, connecting ideas. And so I'm leaning into that. I'm also not afraid to take on new things. And so I didn't realize that others were, even if they were very intelligent, they would not take on something that they had not done before. And so that doesn't matter to me. But I also have learned that I'm not a very detailed-oriented person. And so I have major weaknesses there if you're relying on me to do your taxes. It's like, yeah, I could do them, but I'll do them quick and dirty. If you want me to set up a financial, 20 worksheet valuation with sensitivity analyses, I could look at one, but I don't want to do it. But if you, have other things that you want me to do, if you want to help you figure out a problem that's stumping you because you've only come at it one way, come to me. Or if you want me, I can help you connect you to other people. I can help connect different ideas. I just didn't even know what my strengths were. And I feel like most people don't. And so I would, I'd tell myself to, hey, look inside you, find out what you're good at, what you're not good at. Don't worry about being the same as everyone else. Dive into that and lean into it. Don't try to follow some path that everyone else has trodden, because A, there isn't that path, but B, it doesn't lead to great places.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. A lot of great insights.
Yeah, Igor, thank you for having me.
As we conclude this episode, I'd like to extend my thanks to Jeff Savage. His commitment to fostering connections, inspiring innovation, and empowering his students provides a powerful example for all educators. This is Igor Gorlatov, founder of Traction 5. We're committed to helping teams harness the power of data-driven mentorship, providing tools that boost corporate innovation and accelerate startup growth.